At 15 minutes past 9, in a packed Lagos assembly hall, a chairman in a royal blue agbada pointed at a poor housegirl and called her a thief. He held in his fat ringed fingers the result slip she had truly earned, the highest score in the entire state, and in front of 600 seated students he said the score was stolen. The girl was a fraud, and the rightful first position belonged to his own daughter sitting polished and frightened in the front row. Adaeze Nwosu did not fall to her knees. She did not weep or beg or shout that it was a lie. She stood between two rows of staring children in a faded checked pinafore one size too small, held her worn and retaped textbook against her chest, the way some people hold the last warm thing they own, and looked at the man taking her name apart in public. The way a person looks at weather they cannot stop. What the chairman did not know, as he tore a servant girl's future in half under the bright Louvre windows, was that he had just made the single greatest mistake of his comfortable life, and that the proof of it was sitting on a server in an air-conditioned room across the city, dated, time-stamped, and entirely beyond the reach of his money. To understand how a housegirl in Surulere brought down one of the most powerful men on the Lagos State School Board, you have to go back, before the assembly, before the slip, to a one-room, face-me-I-face-you flat, and a woman who used to plait hair by lamplight, and tell her daughter that a clean name is the only inheritance no one can ever mark. Her name was Ngozi Nwosu, and she sold roasted plantain and groundnut at the mouth of a Surulere street for 11 years. And she raised one child alone after the girl's father walked out before the child could say his name. Ngozi was not an educated woman. She had left school at 12 to hawk for her own mother, and she could read only slowly, moving her finger under each word. But she understood one thing, the way some women understand the weather over the lagoon. She understood that the world would try to price her daughter cheaply, and that the only thing it could never confiscate was a name kept clean and a mind nobody had locked. So she gave Adaeze two things she could not really afford. She gave her school, scraping the fees together coin by coin, and she gave her a saying, repeated so often over a charcoal stove that it stopped being advice and became something closer to a prayer. A clean name is the only inheritance no one can mark, she would say, turning the plantain. Guard it. They can take everything else. They cannot take the thing you actually are. Adaeze was 12 when her mother coughed through one rainy season, and 13 when the cough became something the chemist could not fix, and the small flat could not hold, and the public ward took too late. She buried Ngozi on a gray Saturday with 9 people standing and 1 pot of jollof rice. She did not cry at the graveside because there was no one left to be strong for her, so she decided to be strong for herself. She came home, sat on the floor of the empty room, and held the only things her mother had left her: a battered tin of buttons, a wooden comb, and the saying, "They can take everything else. They cannot take the thing you actually are." A neighbor took her in for a season, then could not feed her, and that is how a grieving orphan with a sharp, hungry mind ended up as a sponsored housegirl. A wealthy family on the island, the Balogans, ran a scheme they liked to talk about at parties, taking in a clever poor child as a live-in domestic, paying the school fees of a nearby secondary school in exchange for the cooking and the cleaning and the fetching, and calling it charity. The head of that house was Chief Donatus Balogan, and in the education pages of the Lagos newspapers, he was a great man. He was 46 years old, a property dealer who had bought his way onto the state school board, and he wore the title of chairman the way other men wear cologne, heavily, so you smelled it before you saw him. He gave fat donations to 2 schools and 1 church. He had his name screwed in brass onto a science block, and he was, by every public measure, respectable. He did not beat servants in the street. He did something cleaner and far colder. He decided who deserved a future and who did not, and he wrote it down on official paper, and he signed it. And here is where I should tell you, plainly, what kind of channel you have wandered into, because if you have ever watched a good, quiet person be written off by a powerful one and felt something in your chest demand that the truth come out, then you already belong here. This is the place where the overlooked are proven, where the kept truth outlasts the polished lie, and where the people the world treats as furniture turn out to be carrying the whole house. Take a moment and subscribe, because the viewers who do are exactly the people these stories are for. Eddie's came into his house at 14, and for 3 years she rose at 4:30 to sweep the marble before anyone woke, washed the plates of a daughter her own age, ironed school uniforms finer than anything she would ever wear, and then walked the long way to a poorer school where her name was on a fees list as a favor. And in the thin hours nobody wanted, before the floor needed sweeping and after the last plate was dried, she did the one thing the world had not managed to take. She read. She read by the security light in the compound when the house slept. She read the daughter's discarded textbooks, the ones thrown in a corner with the spines uncracked, and she taped them when they tore. And she filled the margins of a worn further mathematics book with workings in a tiny disciplined hand, because paper was scarce and a clear mind was not. Her teacher noticed her before anyone else did. His name was Mr. Emeka Okoro, a lean man of 38 who taught mathematics in a short-sleeved white shirt and a dark tie. He nodded the same way every morning, and he had been teaching long enough to know the difference between a child who has been coached and a child who can actually think. He watched a house girl who came to school, tired solve a problem on the board that he had set to defeat the whole class, and he did not clap, and he did not make a speech. He went very still, the way a man goes still when he hears something rare move in the bush. Then he started leaving past question papers on her desk without a word, and collecting them the next morning, and keeping every single one in a brown folder in his cupboard, with the date written in the corner in red ink. He did not tell her why. He simply could not throw them away. He did not yet know that 2 years of dated marked scripts in a teacher's cupboard would one day matter more than every important friend the chairman owned. The state examination came in a Daisy's final year, the big one. The centralized exam that every secondary school child in Lagos sits. The one whose top positions are printed in the papers and whose scholarships can lift a family clean out of poverty in a single morning. She sat it in a hot hall with 300 others, and she wrote until her hand cramped, and when she walked out into the white noon light, she allowed herself one quiet thought she had never let herself think before. She thought, I may have done well. She had no idea how well. The marking was done centrally, scanned and graded by the examination board, with its computers and its servers and its long official procedures. And when the raw positions came through to the school board for release, one name sat at the very top of the entire state. A Daisy Nwosu, a house girl, a scholarship girl, a cleaner's orphan with a taped textbook, had outscored every coached, tutored, well-fed child in Lagos, including, by a long and humiliating distance, one Kimi Balogun, the chairman's only daughter, who had sat the same exam and landed in the anonymous middle of the pack. Chief Donatus Balogun received the unreleased positions on a Thursday evening in his study, with a glass of brandy and his daughter's mediocre score glowing on the screen of his laptop beside the house girl's name at the top. And in that moment, a man who had spent his whole life believing money could rewrite anything made a decision. He did not congratulate the girl who lived in his own house. He did not feel shame, and he did not feel fear, because he had never once been made to feel either. He felt inconvenience. It would not do for the chairman's daughter to be beaten by the family servant. It would not do at all. So he did what such men do. He picked up his phone, and he called people. And over the following days, quietly, for a fee and a favor, the positions were adjusted before public release. Kemi Balogun's name was lifted to the top. Adaeze Nwosu's was struck off entirely and replaced with a single word that would follow her like a smell. Disqualified. Suspected malpractice. The official story, beautifully typed and properly stamped, was that the housegirl had somehow cheated, had been caught, and had been stripped of a score she could never honestly have earned. It was a lie. But it was a neat lie, on government paper, signed by a chairman, and in a city of millions. Neat is very often enough. If you've made it this far into Adaeze's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He was not satisfied with quietly erasing her. A truly careful man would have let the paperwork do its silent work, but Donatus Balogun wanted the matter closed loudly, publicly, so that no whisper of the real result could ever take root. So on results release morning, he came to the poorer school himself, in a fresh royal blue agbada with the gold watch heavy on his wrist, and he asked the headmistress for the assembly hall and the whole student body. The headmistress, Mrs. Folake Coker, a full-figured woman of 55 in a green and gold Ankara wrapper, who feared important men far more than she loved fairness, gave him the podium and stood beside him, with her arms folded and her glasses on their beaded chain, nodding along because the chairman paid for the science block, and a wise headmistress knows which side of the line her bread is buttered. And so, Adaeze, who had been told only that there was a problem with her result, was made to stand in the bright hall in her too small pinafore, while a powerful man held up a slip of paper and told 600 of her peers that she was a fraud, a cheat, a disgrace, a poor girl who had reached above her station and been caught. He said a housegirl could not possibly have come first. He said it as though it were a law of nature. He pointed at his daughter and called her the true champion. He pulled the result slip out of Adaeze's fingers, and he tore the moment in half, and the headmistress called it a sad day, and Kemi Balogun stared at her own lap and said nothing, and around the hall some children laughed, because that is what frightened children do. Adaeze did not argue, because she had learned long ago that you cannot win a shouting match against a man who owns the microphone. She did one thing only. She lifted her chin, she held her taped textbook tighter against her chest, and she let them look at a girl who would not break. Then she walked out of the hall on steady legs, down the bright corridor, and through the gate, and she did not cry until she was 3 streets away, and certain no Balogun could see her do it. She had walked into that hall a scholarship student with the highest score in the state. She walked out a branded sheet with a torn name, no result, no scholarship, and nowhere in the world to go but the one place that had ever treated her as a person with a name. Where Adaeze went was the market, to Mama Nkechi. Mama Nkechi was a wide, slow-moving woman of 62 who sold provisions from the same stall at the edge of Balogun Market. No relation to the chief, the name common as sand, and she had known Ngozi in the old hawking days, and had watched the orphan grow from the corner of her eye for years. She had gray hair, under a faded headscarf, a voice like a closing gate, and a way of seeing through a person that came from burying a husband and a grown son of her own. When Adaeze came to her stall with her eyes swollen and the dust of 3 streets on her shoes, Mama Nkichi did not ask a single question. She cleared a crate, sat the girl down, sent a boy for rice and stew, and let her shake. Then she put on the reading glasses she used for counting change, and she said the only thing worth saying, "Tell me what they did, child." So Adais told her, and when she was done, Mama Nkichi did not offer pity, because pity is a thin soup, and she had fed too many broken people to waste it. She asked one question that landed like a hand on the shoulder. She asked, "When you sat that exam, whose mind was it that wrote the answers?" And Adais, who had not let herself believe in anything since the podium, whispered, "Mine." "Then we are not finished," said Mama Nkichi, "and we are not begging anybody. We are going to prove it. Knowing you are first, and proving it are two different countries, and between them lies a school board, a newspaper, and a man with more money than conscience." Mama Nkichi knew this in her bones. She had watched poor people lose what was rightfully theirs many times, not because they were wrong, but because they were poor and tired and could not afford the long fight, and the powerful counted on exactly that. So she did not send the girl to cry at the school gate. She thought slowly about who in this city still answered to the truth, and she sent word to two people. The first was Mr. Okoro, the teacher, because Mama Nkichi remembered the girl saying once that there was one master who left her papers and never laughed. The second was a name she had heard spoken with respect in the market for years. A woman called Ifeoma Bassi, who worked inside the examination board itself, an invigilation and records officer who had a reputation, rare and precious, for being unbuyable. Mr. Okoro came that same evening, in the shirt he had taught in all day, carrying the brown folder from his cupboard. He spread its contents on a wooden crate under the market's bare bulb. 2 years of Adai's past papers, each marked in his hand, each dated in red ink in the corner. A long, unbroken record of a mind growing steadily sharper, problem after problem, month after month. "This is not the work of a cheat," he said quietly. "A cheat has a good day once. This girl has had 200 good days in a row, and I dated everyone." He had kept them, he said, because in 38 years of life, and many of teaching, he had only ever met 2 students he could not bear to forget, and she was the second. He did not yet know that the careful red dates he had written out of pure habit were about to become the spine of everything. Then Ifeoma Bassi came, and she changed the weather in the room. She was a precise woman of about 48, in a neat navy skirt suit, with the still, careful manner of someone who has spent a career around documents that must not be wrong. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, and then she asked Adais to describe, in detail, 3 specific questions from the exam, and exactly how she had answered them. And she watched the girl recite working she could not possibly have memorized unless she had truly done it, and something in Ifeoma's face hardened into resolve. Because Ifeoma Bassi knew something that the chairman, for all his money, had either forgotten or never understood. She knew how the modern examination board actually works. Every answer script, she explained, is scanned on intake. Every scan is stamped with a candidate number, a center code, and a precise date and time, and stored on the board's secure server with an automatic backup before any human grader ever sees it. The marks are entered against the candidate number, not the name. The names are attached only at the very end, when the final positions are compiled, and that final, name-attached list is the only thing the school board ever touches. Chief Balagan, Ifeoma said slowly, could buy a clerk to swap 2 names on the released list. He could not reach into the server and change which scanned handwriting earned which mark, because that record was sealed and dated and backed up. The moment the papers came in, long before anyone decided to lie, the neat new list contradicted the old true record the machine had kept all along. The chairman, in his certainty that no poor girl would ever get this far, had built his forgery on top of a date and a scan he did not know he could not reach. And there was one more thing, Ifeoma said, and this was the part that made even Maman and Keiichi sit forward. The board system did not merely hold the scores. It held an image of every original script. Somewhere on that server sat a scan of Adazen Wosu's actual answer sheets, in Adazen Wosu's actual handwriting, time-stamped on the morning of the exam, sitting at the top of the state. The thing the chairman had tried to erase had been photographed and dated by the government before he ever picked up his phone. Knowing this and proving it in Lagos are, again, two different countries. Ifeoma told them the truth without softening it, because she did not believe in feeding people comfortable lies. To pull the dated scans and the original score from the server officially, she would have to file a formal records request, and the moment she did, the chairman's allies inside the system would know, and files in this city go missing, the way slippers vanish outside a crowded mosque. She told them it would be a fight, that she could be transferred, suspended, threatened, that the cleaner story on signed paper would tempt people to believe it over a poor girl's word. Then she asked Adaiz if she wanted to go forward, knowing it would be long and ugly, and the girl who had not cried since the podium looked at the marked papers spread under the bare bulb, and at the old woman who had taken her in, and at the teacher who had kept her name in red ink. And she said one word, yes. So they began. And here the story must do its accounting, because the chairman had told everyone who would listen, the school, the board, anyone, that the housegirl was a cheat who had stolen a place she could never have earned, that she had contributed nothing and was owed nothing, that the matter was a sad little fraud now properly closed. That was the lie, and it was a tidy one. This is the ledger. Adazen Wosu rose at 4:30 every morning for 3 years and worked a full servant's day before she ever opened a book. And the books she opened were the ones her employer's daughter threw away unread. She taught herself further mathematics in the margins of a textbook. She taped together 17 times by the light of a security lamp after midnight, on no money and less sleep. She sat the same centralized state exam as 300 tutored, coached, well-fed children in the same hot hall under the same rules. And she beat every single one of them, including the chairman's daughter, who had 3 private tutors and her own quiet room. Mr. Okoro had 2 years of dated proof that her mind was real. Ifeoma Basi knew the server held the scanned, time-stamped truth of it. And Mama and Keiichi fed all of them, night after night, out of a provision stall, and never once asked to be repaid. None of this was nothing. All of it had happened, and most of it was written down somewhere, by someone, kept. The chairman had said a servant girl could not be first. The record said a servant girl had been first by a distance that frightened him. Then the counterattack came, and for a while, it looked as though Neat would beat true after all. Chief Donatus Balogan was not a man who lost quietly, because he had never lost at all. When word reached him through the school that the housegirl had somehow found a teacher, a market woman, and worst of all, someone inside the board asking questions, he moved the way powerful men move, smoothly and from a distance. Ifeoma Basi's formal records request was logged on a Monday. By Wednesday, she had been abruptly reassigned to a satellite office. Her access to the Central Archive suspended pending a vague internal review, and a quiet word was passed that an officer who valued her pension should not involve herself in a settled matter. Mr. Okoro was summoned by Mrs. Coker and reminded, coldly, that troublemakers do not get their contracts renewed, and that a man his age, with no other prospects, should think very carefully about a house girl who was, after all, already disgraced. And around the school the chairman's version hardened into fact. The official letter was produced again and again, stamped and clean and signed. The house girl cheated and was caught. All in order, all correct. For 10 long days it looked as though the chief would win, because the man with money had reached his hand directly into the machine and pulled out the very people who could expose him. Adie's sat in the back of Mama and Nkechi's stall in the evenings and felt the old gray emptiness come back, the one from the floor of the empty flat. Even Mr. Okoro, tired and frightened for his livelihood, came one night and quietly said that perhaps the wall was simply too high, that the slip was gone, the access was cut, and it was now her word against a chairman's signature, and that the courts of this world too often believe the cleaner paper over the poorer person. Adise listened to all of it without moving. She did not weep. She did not wring her hands. She reached into her bag and brought out the worn, taped Further Mathematics textbook, and she set it down on the crate between them, the way her mother used to set down a thing that mattered, plainly, squarely, without apology. And then she reminded them, quietly, of something despair had made them forget. The server was not the only place the truth lived, because for 2 years, every time she finished one of Mr. Okoro's past papers, she had also, out of a poor girl's deep habit of keeping things, copied her cleanest workings onto loose sheets and tucked them inside the back cover of that very textbook. Each sheet dated in her own hand, the same disciplined hand that had filled the margins. And more than that, Ifeoma had said the scans were backed up automatically, before any grader, before any name was attached. A suspended officer could be locked out of the front door of the archive, but a backup, Adise said slowly, is by its nature a second copy, kept somewhere else, precisely so that no single hand can erase the record. The chairman had reached the released list. He had reached the people. He had not reached the backup, and he had not reached the year of dated handwriting in her own bag, because he did not know either of them existed. The turning of the tide did not come with shouting. It came because the chairman, who could not stop being what he was, could not resist one final flourish of pride. To crown his daughter's stolen victory, Donatus Balogan threw a celebration and posted it for the whole city to see. Photographs of Kemi Balogan in a fine gold dress beside a printed banner that read, in large proud letters, "First in the state." He posted it on a public page under his own name, with a caption boasting that brilliance ran in good blood and that excellence could not be faked. He meant it as a final nail in the house girl's coffin. It became the rope for his own neck. Because that public boast, time-stamped and screenshotted within the hour, was seen by a young investigative journalist named Sei Adeyemi, who covered education for an online paper and had a long, cold dislike of big men who bought what they had not earned. The market women, who hear everything in a city that thinks they hear nothing, had already carried Adesa's story to him in fragments. Now the chairman himself had put his lie on a banner, in writing, in public, and dared the world to check it. Sei began to dig. He found Mr. Okoro in his folder of dated scripts. He found Ifeoma Bassi, suspended and angry and certain. And Ifeoma, locked out of the front door but not yet dismissed, did the one careful thing still open to her. She did not hack anything, and she did not steal anything. She formally requested, through the proper external channel, that a records officer is legally entitled to use, a certified copy of the candidate level scan and score, held in the off-site backup for one specific candidate number, on the grounds of a disputed result, in writing, with a journalist and a teacher, as named witnesses to the request. The backup was held by a separate technical unit that had never heard of Chief Belogan and did not care who he was. They processed the request as routine, and there it came, printed and certified, dragged into the daylight, the scanned image of Adais Nwosu's original answer scripts in her own unmistakable handwriting, stamped with the candidate number, the center code, and the precise date and time of the morning. She sat the exam, attached to a raw score that sat at the very top of the entire state. Beside it, the released list the chairman had doctored, with that same candidate number now somehow attached to his daughter's name and a lower mark. The numbers did not match the names. The machine had remembered exactly whose hand wrote which answers, and no amount of money had been able to make it forget. The reckoning, when it finally came, was quiet, and it was total. Say Adeyemi published, carefully and without a single word he could not prove. He laid it all out the way the truth is best laid out, plainly, side by side. He published the certified backup scan, the candidate number, the time stamp from the morning of the exam, and the top of state raw score in Adai's handwriting. Beside it, he published the chairman's doctored release list. Beside that, photographs of Mr. Okoro's 2 years of dated marked scripts in the same handwriting, and the loose dated sheets from inside the taped textbook. And beside all of it, last of all, he published the chairman's own celebration banner, first in the state, posted in his own hand, under his own name, on his own page, claiming as his daughter's the precise score the server proved belonged to the girl who scrubbed his floors. The forgery did not merely fail. It stood up in public and accused itself. The story moved fast, the way a true thing does once it finds the light, and within days the examination board, facing the certified evidence from its own backup, opened a formal review, confirmed that the candidate level record had never changed, and restored Adais Nwosu to her rightful first position in the state. Filing falsified examination results and procuring the alteration of an official record are serious matters, and the conveniently arranged transfers and suspensions were now themselves evidence of how deep the rot went. The board referred the conduct of its compromised officials and of the school board chairman to the proper authorities. Mrs. Coker, the headmistress who had lent her hall and her arms folded approval to the public branding of an innocent child, was quietly removed. And Chief Donatus Belogan, who had screwed his name in brass onto a science block and worn the word chairman like cologne, lost the board seat, lost the standing, and lost the one thing he had traded his conscience to protect, which was the belief, held by important people at parties, that he was a respectable man. The property deals that had floated on his name began to sink with it. He was undone, completely and in public, by the single boast he had posted to bury her. And through all of it, Adais Nwosu did not gloat, not once. When Say's report broke, and other journalists found her at last at the edge of the market, microphones pushed toward a girl in a faded pinafore, and asked how it felt to bring down a chairman, she said simply that she had not brought down anyone. She said her name had always been clean, and that the truth had only had to be allowed to speak. That was all. She said 4 words to the gathered cameras, and then she went back inside to help Mama Nkichi weigh out a customer's rice. The 4 words were these: my name was clean. Now jump forward 3 years, to a bright Saturday in the dry season, to a small-story building on a Surelaire street not far from where a woman once roasted plantain on a charcoal stove. There is a hand-painted sign above the door, and a veranda where children sit cross-legged with books on their knees in the warm afternoon light. Adais took the restored scholarship every naira of it. And she went to university, and she studied through the nights with the same disciplined hand, and she came out the other side. And the first thing she built, before a car, before comfort, before anything for herself, was this. It is a small free coaching center for poor children, sponsored students and hawkers' daughters, and house girls who read by security lights the way she once did. And it does one simple thing. It refuses to let a clever poor child be priced cheaply by the world. Mr. Okoro, retired now from the school that never deserved him, teaches mathematics there 2 afternoons a week, and he keeps a brown folder of his students' work, each sheet dated in red ink in the corner, because some habits are too valuable to break. Ifeoma Bassi, reinstated and promoted after the review, sits on the center's small board and makes very sure its records are always correct. Mama Nkichi, older and slower, sits on the veranda in the cool of the evening and tells the frightened new children exactly what she once told a dust-covered orphan at her stall, that nobody is finished as long as the truth is still on their side, and that you do not have to beg for what is already yours. And Adizi Nwosu, who walked out of an assembly hall, a branded cheat with a torn name, and walked back into the world the rightful first in the state, stands among those children most afternoons with a worn, taped further mathematics textbook in her hands. The same one. Soft at the spine, dated sheets still tucked in the back. She uses it to teach, and at the start of every term, she holds it up and tells a room of poor children the only inheritance her mother ever left her, the saying that turned the plantain over a charcoal stove and kept a frightened girl standing when 600 people watched a powerful man try to take her name. A clean name is the only inheritance no one can mark, she tells them. Guard it. They can take everything else. They cannot take the thing you actually are. So here is what I want to leave you with tonight. You can sign a clean lie on government paper. You can buy a list and a clerk and a headmistress and an hour at a podium, and you can stand in front of 600 children in a fine blue agbada and call a brilliant poor girl a thief and walk away believing your money has finally bought you the last word. But you cannot reach into the machine and change whose hand wrote the answers, because the truth, once it is written down and dated and kept somewhere your money cannot reach, is more patient than any lie and harder than any pride. So let me ask you this, and think about it honestly before you answer. When the chairman tore her result in half in that bright hall, do you think a day's won in the end because she was lucky that a server remembered her, or because a mother, a teacher, and a market woman had all quietly kept the truth in places no powerful man ever thought to look? And if it had been you standing in that pinafore, with the whole school staring and a big man calling you a fraud, would you have known, in that terrible moment, to lift your chin and keep your name?